Hello, this is Dr. Eric Chapman from Chapman Wellcare, and in today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about getting cardiovascular exercise. We're going to talk about what's called Zone 2 training. We're also going to talk about monitoring cardiovascular exercise with heart rate. So, interesting topic. I just happen to like exercise physiology. I'm a medically trained doctor. I've engaged in a few triathlons. I'm not even a good triathlete, but this is just something that I like to talk about. And there's a lot of information out there regarding what's called the Zone 2 training. And really what you're trying to do is find different heart rate zones that would be compatible with the best amount of efficiency to build cardiovascular endurance. So let's talk about that a little bit. So you have zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And there's different ways to kind of gauge what level or what zone you're at, right? They even have different colors. So for example, zone 3 would be like your orange zone, or the kind of the popular exercise brand Orange Theory, or zone 2 would be your blue zone. But let's talk about a little bit about what this means. And there's different ways to measure zone 2. But even before we talk about that, why do we care, right? If you're someone who likes to leisurely exercise, turn off your brain, not worry about metrics, then this may even be counterproductive, and I wouldn't even advise doing it, right? If your goal of exercise is to disconnect from a stressful day, to not look at phones, to not monitor metrics, then this may be more stressful. If you're using exercise as a moving meditation, then there are some people who engage in exercise and don't even want to know pace numbers. And sometimes if you want to be a little bit more methodical on your training, or you want to increase fat burning, sometimes monitoring your heart rate can be a good tool to point you in that direction. And there's a few different ways to do it. A lot of, typical sports watches have a sensor in the back, and that operates on what's called PPG, and it sends a light signal that goes through your wrist, and that amount of light scatter as your blood is flowing through the vessels in your wrist tries to give an estimate on heart rate. And that's one way to do it. It works well sometimes, but there can be some error depending on how much sweat you have on your wrist, how much movement of your wrist. So depending on how methodical and scientific you want to be, sometimes people will even use what's called a chest strap heart rate monitor. And just as it implies, it wraps around your chest, and this can Bluetooth to any kind of sports watch. This one here just happens to be a Garmin, but these are different ways to monitor your heart rate in real time while you're exercising. So why even do it, right? So Zone 2 training, or what we call endurance training, is that sweet spot where you build up your base endurance. So if you're looking to increase your cardio, if you're looking to fat burn, if you're looking to engage in an event that is longer than 30-40 minutes, training at a zone 2 heart rate is usually what most sports scientists would agree on. Now, it's not the only training you should engage in, but even some people would say that the 80%, 20% rule is a good marker. Now, everyone's different. I'm not an athletic coach, I'm not a sports scientist, but these are just some general markers to keep in mind if you want to start dabbling with training by heart rate. So one of the formulas that you can use, and if you forget everything and just remember one thing about this video, is to find your appropriate zone 2 heart rate. You're going to want to take the number 180 and subtract it by your age. So if you're 40 years old, your optimal heart rate zone would be 140 beats per minute. Now, we don't have to split hairs on whether it's 135 or 145, but just as a general rule, for this example, if you were 40 years old, your cardiovascular aerobic endurance zone 2 is somewhere in the 140 beats per minute. From a science standpoint, your body utilizes energy via two main routes. You have the aerobic metabolism and the anaerobic metabolism. Aerobic metabolism uses oxygen and uses the utilization of fat and the energy in your body very efficiently. It does so in somewhat of a slower fashion. So when your body needs faster energy, when you're running faster, when you're swimming faster, when you're cycling faster, when you're sprinting, you're using anaerobic metabolism. You're producing lactic acid. You're trying to get quicker sources of fuel from places like the liver that store carbohydrates in the form of what's called glycogen. So if you're someone who wants to maybe lose a little bit more weight and increase your fat burning, training in a zone 2 heart rate ensures that the majority of your training is gearing towards the oxidation of fat, the burning of fat. And you don't always have to use a heart rate monitor. There's some other different surrogates to determine whether you're in zone 2. The most common one is called the talk test, where you should feel that you can converse at a somewhat conversational level. So if you can kind of run with a buddy or a friend and you feel like you can somewhat talk, it's a little bit labored, but you can still get some sentences out. Some people would say that's the talk test, and that's kind of a good indication that you're in zone 2. If you're huffing and puffing, if you're going real hard and you're gasping, you're definitely kind of in a higher zone category. Not that one is better than the other, but these are just different ways to kind of determine what zone you're in depending on the goals that you want when you're engaging in exercise. So overall, that's just a real basic primer on zone 2 training and different ways to use heart rate. This is not at all an exhaustive video. There's a lot of good resources out there for people who do a deep dive into the science. But overall, just remember 180 minus your age. And if you have a way of monitoring your heart rate, that's where you're gonna get an endurance build. You're gonna decrease your likelihood of injury. You're gonna increase fat metabolism. So this is just a brief video on zone 2 heart rate aerobic training. I'm Dr. Chapman from Chapman WellCare. If you have any questions, you can give us a call at 239-359-6500. Thank you very much. Have a good day.